All right, let's get this done. First rule of this channel, we do not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 post-draft wide receiver re-rankings. A lot of movers and shakers in this. Remember, I'm not trying to chase last year's production. I'm trying to chase this year's range of outcomes when I list these guys. And again, certain guys are not going to be very interesting to me. Like I don't want a wide receiver threes that have wide receiver three ranges of outcome. I don't even really want wide receivers that have just wide receiver threes range of outcome, even if they're going outside of that range. I don't even want to be playing with wide receiver twos. Those guys grow on trees. Like I'm trying to find these higher upside guys. Looking at last year, I want like your Nico Collins that were essentially going undrafted, Puka, that type of stuff. Like that's what we're looking for. Having to spend the 101 to get CD Lamb, probably not going to win you a league unless you compare him with Puka going undrafted. So that would be the idea behind this. There's going to be a lot of movement during the offseason, mini camp, camp hype, and training camp, trying to figure out where the roles for these guys are going to be and what we can expect from their ranges of outcomes going forward. All right. So CG Lamb, no change to this from the Cowboys draft. Garrett Wilson, they drafted Malachi Corley in the third. I don't necessarily even think he's like a real wide receiver three overall. So probably just a good situation. I do want to move Puka down from wide receiver three overall. The biggest competition is going to be Cooper Kupp, the technician. I don't know if he's going to necessarily be able to have that outlier year where over the age apex, he's going to cut into Puka. I don't necessarily like him this high. I just can't tell the story why he's, anybody can jump over him or I have to move him down. Jamar Chase stays at wide receiver 4, even though they drafted Jermaine Burton in the 3rd round and they brought in 2 tight ends. There's going to be a lot of competition there. Again, I think that kind of caps Jamar Chase's range of outcomes. Tyreek Hill stays wide receiver 5. I'm going to talk about their Dolphins wide receivers a little bit later in the draft as we go. Again, this is because I'm a big scaredy cat and I won't move him down even though he's over the age apex. Devontae Adams, he stays wide receiver 6. Again, another guy that I won't move down even though he's over the age apex. He's another technician. I think he can win without having to have the elite level athleticism anymore. Gardner Minshew coming in probably upgrades him. I don't even actually think Brock Bowers coming in is going to necessarily downgrade him. It just might be a guy to help pull coverage away. Expecting more of a return from that wide receiver 11 last year to wide receiver 3 in 2022. That's kind of more why I would keep him in this range. Justin Jefferson stays a wide receiver 7, a little bit of competition for targets. It's more about the unknown variable of the quarterback play between the rookie JJ McCarthy that they just brought in and Sam Darnold. The Sun God stays wide receiver 8. That's not very surprising. Competition for targets going to be there. It's a good offense. He's going to be athletically limited. That's Bob's your uncle. So Lad McConkey going to be wide receiver 9. I know this is going to be like the first controversial one. So 2nd round pick. So the draft capital is like okay. He does project to be the number 1 wide receiver attached to Justin Herbert. That's like the long and short of it. They brought in an offensive lineman. The offensive line looks like it's going to be better. Trying to tell the story where he doesn't get somewhere between 120 and 180 targets with Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston being the number 2 and the number 3 in the offense. You're also looking at like competition from like Hayden Hurst as a tight end. They don't have a receiving back. Receiving backs like would really bother me because again, vacated targets tend to go to running backs in this case. So we have a perfect storm of saying, hey, can we tell the story where Lad McConkey finishes wide receiver 1? Yes. Can I tell the story where Lad McConkey finishes wide receiver 20? Yes. Okay, let's put him at like wide receiver 9 and see how it goes on. The biggest thing behind this, and this is kind of how I do my rankings, if I go hunt down like Lad McConkey and I try and figure out like where he's going, like Fantasy Pros, he's going wide receiver 47, I'll smash that all day. Like that would be a situation where like I'm almost going to be spending like a 13th round pick on a guy that I have rated as wide receiver 9. That's just me. On ESPN, again, wide receiver 47, just criminally undervalued based off the story that we can tell for his range of outcomes. Probably a wide receiver 3, I guess. I would say at the minimum in wide receiver 3, the elite level wide receiver outcome if he can get that. So again, 180 to 120 targets. He, probably still would be efficient. There are some things to not like about him overall, but good route runner, good athleticism, like good quarterback, probably a good offense. I don't know how to make them any lower. Marvin Harrison, 4th overall pick, goes to the Cardinals. Not as good of a landing spot. There is going to be competition for targets. They brought in a 3rd round tight end to go along with Trey McBride, who I have as the number 2 tight end. They have an X on the outside in Michael Wilson. And then Kyler Murray is probably not the best quarterback in the league when it comes to upsides. Hasn't thrown for over 4,000 yards. A lot of mouths to feed. I would definitely think that like Marvin Harrison's range of outcomes is slightly lower. If I pull this up, than Ladd McConkey's. I would probably say like you're looking at 120 targets to 150 targets. That's probably the reason why I would rank him slightly lower based off the landing spot. More competition for targets is probably going to hurt him overall. Moving on to wide receiver 11. If you're familiar with this channel, I don't like guys that cannibalize each other. You're looking at Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. That's probably going to cap the upside of AJ Brown. And again, Jalen Hurts has not thrown for more than 4,000 yards. They brought in Saquon Barkley. Any vacated targets tend to go to running backs. Yeah, I'm not going to spend, and I've talked about this before, I'm not going to spend wide receiver 7 price or 6 prices to get wide receiver 7. It doesn't make any sense to me. You run your roster the way that you want. I'll talk about like Justin Jefferson. Like, can I understand you spending the 101 on Justin Jefferson? Absolutely. Is that his range of outcomes? Absolutely. Again, with AJ Brown, do I think his range of outcomes is going to be wide receiver 1? Absolutely not. Because the road that gets there, you got to remember, for him to finish as wide receiver 7 last year, you had the issues with Justin Jefferson. You had the issues with Jamar Chase. Like, there are reasons Cooper Kupp didn't finish where we thought he was going to finish. There's reasons why his 1,450 yards and 7 touchdowns had him finish as wide receiver 7 on the year, when we can go look at, and I can bring up this tier, guys. I think this is the Cooper Kupp tier. Cooper Kupp's season, when he did that legendary season, wide receiver 1, 145 receptions, 1,900 yards, and 16 touchdowns. Like, you got to tell me the story where I would rank AJ Brown at wide receiver 6 or 7, where he can finish that season when he's going to have Devontae Smith eating into him. And we'll talk about Johnny Wilson here in a second. Let's see. Moving on from that, Drake London, wide receiver 12, no change. Nothing came in. It's more going to be the volatility with Kirk Cousins coming in. Potentially could be the number 2 behind Kyle Pitts. I can imagine his range of outcomes may be closer to wide receiver 20, may disappoint a little bit. Also has the range of outcomes to be wide receiver 1 if he actually has that high volume season. Chris Olave, this is another one where it's like, hey, could probably flirt with being a top 10 wide receiver if all the coins flip in the right direction. That's what I would be looking at with Chris Olave. We'll have probably a year before he hits the age apex where the the air yards and the touchdowns all come together in one magical season. He does like 1,700 yards. Again, probably the downside of that is going to be he stays around like 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns. So have to kind of bake in the possibility he's going to burn you into his ADP. Jalen Waddle, this is another one at wide receiver 14. If I'm expecting Tyreek Hill to go down, then that means there's going to be a reaction to that. It's going to be Jalen Waddle. We'll talk about their 6th round pick a little bit later in this one. But yeah, I could definitely see Jalen Waddle getting back into the top 10 because of this. That's why I would put him at wide receiver 14. Michael Pittman gets moved down. That's going to be because of their 2nd round pick. We'll get into that when we get there. But the main thing is, if he's not going to get the totality of the route tree, if he's not going to get like the deep shots, if he's not going to get the red zone work, if he's going to be more of the first look on an RPO type of guy, you're looking at low value targets that are going to be low ADOT, high volume guy. That's about what you're looking for. So a 1-to-1 replacement for last year. Over under 156 targets, 109 receptions, 1,100 yards, 4 touchdowns. Wide receiver 15, guess what? I have him ranked wide receiver 15. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 16, massive range of outcomes, a lot of competition for targets. We're also expecting that there may be a jump forward in Noah Fant on his 2nd contract, but also going to have that range of outcomes, that Megatron light type season, 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns. DJ Moore drops down just a little bit. I'm probably going to be continuing to compress the ADPs between DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome as the offseason goes on. I only dropped him like 2 spots. I still think that he could end up being the favorite for Caleb Williams, which means like, yes, if Caleb's what we think he's going to be and DJ Moore gets the volume, he still could flirt with wide receiver 1 in a way that I don't think Rome could do as a rookie, or old man Keenan Allen could do. That's why I'm having a hard time moving him down. But again, he did drop a couple spots because of the Rome selection. Mike Evans over the AJ Pex. This is going to be wide receiver 18. Probably a regression in touchdowns. I don't know about yardage. They brought in a third round wide receiver. This is a guy that I want to continue to move down. Remember, he finished as wide receiver 5 last year with all the injuries. I want to continue to move him down because of age. It's hard as the number 1, even with Baker May, to move Mike Evans down with how he can be used, all the different ways he can be used. Nico Collins drops down to wide receiver 19. And again, it's a very similar conversation to Mike Evans, even with a lot of mouths to feed in what projects to be a very good high volume passing offense. Overall, continuing to move him down. Again, I think him and Tank's like all the way down the 40s. Him and Stephon Diggs, they're going to continue to compress as I hedge my bets down the line. Again, this extremely efficient 80 receptions on 109 targets, 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. It's difficult when we can't tell the story how he increases that targets. So we're expecting like this extremely efficient season to happen again with another target in the offense. So moving on to Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk is going to stay wide receiver 20. So he's wide receiver 14 last year. They brought in Ricky Pearsall. That doesn't bother me as much as, again, the high value or the high efficiency season that he had in 2014. Still going to have Debo, still going to have Christian McCaffrey, still going to have Kittle. It's just a hard road to tell how he can jump into that next tier guys. Debo Samuel, wide receiver 21. I just put him right next to Ayuk. Not a lot to say. The biggest thing that you're looking at with Ayuk, you may get a positive regression in the receiving yards after a down 2022 season. 1,400 yards in 2021, high efficiency. The bigger thing with him, so I would imagine that there might be like 200 yards variance that he could go 1,100 yards, 1,200 yards, something along that. Remember, he has 5 rushing touchdowns that are likely to always be on the under if I'm going to be picking. Devontae Smith, they signed him a $25 million a year deal. They expect him to be a mid-range wide receiver 1. Again, with A.J. Brown, I don't know how much he can actually move up. They may compress at the end of the season to be around like wide receiver 15. But that's why I would have A.J. Brown as high as he is and Devontae Smith as low as he is, expecting they might end up meeting someplace in the middle. Cooper Kupp, this is going to be wide receiver 23. Maybe because he is more of a technician, he doesn't need the athleticism, going to be over the AJ Pex battling with Puka. Could see a return to top 10 wide receiver. I don't think we're going to see a return to elite, but that's why I would put him here with that expectation. They didn't bring anybody in. Keenan Allen, all the way down at wide receiver 24, expecting to be the security blanket attached to Caleb Williams. I don't think there's a lot of risk in Keenan Allen. I don't think there's a lot of reward in it. Stephon Diggs, basically the same story, attached to CJ Stroud. Terry McLaurin jumps all the way up to wide receiver 26 with the selection of Jaden Daniels. There's going to be a lot of mouths to feed. I can bring this up. That's why I have these things here with Washington. So they bring in Jaden Daniels with the first pick. And then in the second, they bring in Brendan Sanote, the tight end from Kansas State. I thought he was undervalued. They went up and they selected him. I like that. I like the Brandon Coleman selection from TCU, Luke McCaffrey. So we definitely can talk about the pecking order, expecting it to be Scary Terry, wide receiver 1. I'm going to guess that Dotson is going to be the wide receiver 2. Luke McCaffrey is going to be the wide receiver 3. And then Sanote could be anywhere from this year's Sam Laporta to the number 4 in the offense. But again, there's a lot of stuff to like. So I'm going to bet right now with Terry McLaurin that there's a possibility of that massive breakout that we've been looking for like 5 years at this point. And it just hasn't happened because of the poor quarterback play. This is probably the best quarterback that he's had, especially when it comes to throwing a deep ball. I probably do want to be picking up my shares of Terry McLaurin, and it's going to be definitely based off of price. Wide receiver 33, yeah, I think that's okay value. Wide receiver on ESPN, as long as he's going under wide receiver 26, I think is the possibility of a massive return. Because I think there's a top 10 or even top 5 upside when it comes to McLaurin. and I don't see him. So I'm not going to waste your time trying to hunt the guy down. It's Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 37, ESPN. I think that's a really good return. You're probably going to be getting a wide receiver 2 at the very least, and you're going to spend wide receiver 3 prices on him. All right. Malik Neighbors all the way at wide receiver. Where I'm looking at my notes. Wide receiver 27. Again, this is just good draft capital. I think he's a good player. This is a bad landing spot attached to Daniel Jones. Doesn't have a lot of competition for targets, but again, bad landing spot. I don't know how much high volume passing is going to be going on for him. I could definitely see bust all the way. I could definitely see that he has the ability to finish as like a fringe wide receiver 1 with talent. And it's basically the same story with Xavier Leggett, the first round draft pick for the Panthers. Probably a better landing spot and maybe a little bit more competition for targets with Deontay Johnson being there and old man, the ghost of Adam Thielen. But again, I bet on the draft capital. I bet on the athletic measurables in this case. This is going to be one of those guys that probably going to have wide receiver 2 range of outcomes because the second half of the season is going to be better than the first half of the season. And again, that would be the same thing I'd say with the first round draft pick for the Jaguars, Brian Thomas going to the Jaguars. He actually moved up after they released Zay Jones. So I think that there is a better chance that he does finish his wide receiver 1. So when we look at these guys, like it's draft capital and then the quarterback attached to him. So like, I don't like Daniel Jones being attached to Neighbors. You're looking at Bryce Young being attached to Xavier Leggett. A lot of competition for targets right now in Carolina, maybe slightly less competition for targets with the Jaguars, but probably has the best quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. Javon Baker and Jalen Polk, I have combined together as wide receiver 30 overall. During the offseason, trying to get an idea of which one is going to end up being the number 1 in this offense. So again, this is another team that went out and had a really good draft. So maybe one of those bad offenses, teams that we think are going to have bad offenses, they're going to have a good offense. Drake May, the first round pick. Jalen Polk going in the second. Wallace, the offensive tackle from Penn State, going in third. Robinson, the guard from Texas A&M, going in the fourth. And then Baker going in the fourth also. So like we could tell the story how this offense is going to be like ridiculously improved. If I had to bet on draft capital, it would be Polk. If it was just my gut feeling, it would be Baker. And again, both these guys, it really doesn't matter because on Fantasy Pros, you're looking at Polk going at like wide receiver 72 and Baker going at wide receiver 83. Probably a lot of leagues, these guys may not even go drafted in your non-snob type leagues. So again, picking up one of these guys as a lottery ticket is probably not a very bad idea. Let's see. Moving on, Zay Flowers. They did draft a wide receiver. That's not the entirety of the reason behind it. They also re-signed Rashad Bateman. If I could pull this up, if I can go hunt these down. That would be the reason why I would have him all the way down there. So they Tez Walker, the wide receiver from North Carolina, went in the 4th round. So my expectation that there is going to be a Zay Flowers breakout is a little bit lower because of the selection of Walker, the re-signing of Bates. It may just allow Zay Flowers to be more of that slot only type guy. Still going to have Mark Andrews there, lower volume passing offense. I still think there's a story for him to finish as a wide receiver 1. I just think I'm less confident about it than I was before the Tez Walker and Rashad Bates, dealing with bombs. So T. Higgins all the way down here at wide receiver 32. Again, a lot of competition for targets, and I just don't know if he's going to want to play for the Bengals this year. That's like the easiest way to put it. Like, probably not going to have a road to wide receiver 1 again. Closest he finished was wide receiver 17 in 2022, and that's not the greatest season with 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. And again, trying to tell the story where we can get to Puka or CeeDee Lamb or something like that, like at that volume, when he may end up really actually being a wide receiver 3. And in the best case from a real life football perspective, he is the 1B to a dominant wide receiver like Chase. And they've already decided like they have his replacement in Burton. I just don't know how much return on investment I can get out of him if I put him any higher. And it's basically the same story with Jordan Addison. He's going to be the 1B behind Justin Jefferson. He's just going to be the guy that gets what's left when teams decide to take away Justin Jefferson doesn't necessarily have anything more than the range of outcomes. Like I could see him and T. Higgins in a perfect world flirting with top 10 wide receiver because of who they're attached to. Jordan Addison's got to be lower because of the quarterback situation. I'm going to bet on Joe Burrow more than I'm going to bet on JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold. Deontay Johnson moves down because of the Xavier Leggett selection. Probably going to have a range of outcomes somewhere in the wide receiver 20s. Again, when we look at him and that like 144 targets, 169 targets, 147 targets, finishing with a high of wide receiver 9, and that's 1,100 yards, 8 targets. Like I think that's like the tippity top of his range of outcomes. Probably going to be closer to like 900, 800 yards, something along those lines, and expecting that like some of those higher value touches are going to go to Leggett over him. Again, this is, let's not ruin Bryce Young. I like what the Panthers did. I just don't think he's got league winner written on him any longer. Rashee Rice drops all the way down to wide receiver 35. This isn't just because of the possibility of the suspension. I would probably even move him down further once that comes out. This is more along the lines that like I really, really, really like what the what the Chiefs did with the selection of Xavier Worthy. This is, in my mind, this may end up being a 1-to-1 replacement for Tyreek Hill down the line. Xavier Worthy does play a lot bigger or a lot more physical than 5'11", 165, and he runs a 4.21. Like, yeah. So if I'm going to bet down the line what I think is going to happen, there's a better chance that Rashee Rice is going to be like a big slot instead of running those quote unquote big boy routes. And those big boy routes, not the big boy routes, the actual higher upside productive routes are going to go to Worthy on the outside with Hollywood Brown. So he theoretically could fall all the way to like number 3 in the offense. Probably not even going to be the number 1. They re-signed Kelsey. There's reasons to move him all the way down here. Probably a better range of outcomes is going to be mid wide receiver 2. Then my expectation is that he could hit that 150 targets and be a wide receiver 1 based off last year. So Chris Godwin all the way down here at wide receiver 36. A very similar story to Rashee Rice. Like we're expecting Mike Evans to be the number 1. He may not get the red zone work. He may just be this volume-based possession guy at this point in his career. So like I don't have a lot of hope with Baker May as the quarterback, and then they brought in a wide receiver in the 3rd round. Like there's a lot of stuff I don't like about that. Khalil Shakur does move down. They did bring in a wide receiver in the 2nd round. We'll get to Keon Coleman here in a second. I'm more concerned with Dalton Kincaid overall, and I think there is a range of outcomes where either he is a wide receiver 3 or just disappoints in general. So that's why I would keep him down here. He is one of my sleepers. I think overall he's going to have a lot of value versus where he's going to go in the draft. I could definitely see that he could be a 1-to-1 replacement for good Stephon Diggs. That's why I would probably be looking at wide receiver 61. Again, that's probably going to be very close to not draftable or just inside round 13 in a lot of your 15 roster spot leagues. So that's what I'd be looking at. I think there is return on investment to, at a minimum, be wide receiver 3, if not wide receiver 2. I do think that there is a possibility that he could hit that 150 target range and be closer to that. When I look at Khalil Shakur, what he was flirting with at certain points on the season, there is enough hope. 6 for 6 for 92 in week 8 against Tampa Bay. I do like this pick a lot. He may be on my short list by the end of the year. Calvin Ridley doesn't really move. They didn't bring anybody in. He's at wide receiver 38. Again, expecting that Will Levis takes a step forward. They did go out and draft an offensive tackle. I do like that. I just like some of the other rookies a lot better. George Pickens. So I did hear that Arthur Smith, the former head coach of the Falcons, is the offensive coordinator for Steelers. And I don't be surprised if I just move all the Steelers weapons down the board because Arthur Smith is not very fantasy friendly. And then I have Jerry Jeudy and Amari Cooper as combined wide receiver 40. Once I get a better idea of where these guys are going to go, I would probably move them up or down. Cooper's going to be over the age apex. Jerry Judy's Jerry Jeudy. I don't know how much I like Deshaun Watson, but they're both going to probably be around this range. They have upside. They also may disappoint. But we're looking at you, Jerry Jeudy. The guy that I would probably want the most out of this offense right now would be Njoku, the tight end. Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 41. A little bit of an upgrade with Bo Nix coming in, probably has a little bit more upside. Christian Watson, he's going to be another one of those high efficiency guys. So you're looking at Nico Collins. If he can stay healthy, you're looking at like a possibility of a Nico Collins or Brandon Ayuk type season attached to Jordan Love. He's going to be the guy out of all these receivers that I have ranked the highest. A lot of volatility between being a fringe wide receiver one, if everything breaks the right way, and missing a whole bunch of time and other guys eating into the theoretical outcome that is Christian Watson. Roman Wilson, the third round pick for the Steelers, is going to be at wide receiver 43. I think that he may end up being a safer pick than George Pickens. I think Pickens will probably win you a few more weeks than Roman Wilson will. I definitely think that he might end up being the number 2 wide receiver on a very run heavy offense. Jackson Smith-Njigba all the way down here at wide receiver 44. Probably going to be more like a Jarvis Landry. So a lot of things have to break in the right direction. Probably going to have to get close to like 100 receptions, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. He jumps up to really be the possession guy for the Seahawks. The Seahawks probably are not going to be a good offense. So we'd have to tell the story where he takes a step forward. And then for him to actually be able to win leagues, he's going to have to get probably some help from a whole bunch of other guys, either disappointing or some injuries. I'm just seeing if I can figure out where he is going. 44. So I don't think I'm that out of line on him. Tank Dell all the way down here at wide receiver 45. One of the reasons why I have him down here right now is that gunshot wound that kind of bothers me. That's the only news that we have. Probably going to be boom bust guy out of the 3: Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and who am I fitting? Tank Dell. So the other thing to look at with these guys, and I have Rome right next to him because I'm going to say that Rome is probably going to be a very similar player in this offense. So if Caleb Williams and CJ Stroud are 1-to-1, Rome and Tank Dell are going to be those boom bust guys. Keenan Allen and Stephon Diggs are going to be like the security blanket, and then Nico and DJ Moore are going to be the high volume or high efficiency guys, high productive guys in the offenses. That's why I would have Rome all the way down here. I want to move Rome and Tank Dell up. We're going to have to hear some stuff out of camp, I guess, to kind of guess if they're worth the dart throw on. Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, this is going to be all the way down there at wide receiver 47. I would expect that Xavier Worthy may eat into Hollywood Brown as the season goes on. So your best range of outcomes for both of these guys is going to be around this Marquise Brown 2021 season where he did 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. He had 8 touchdowns in 2020. So maybe that, and then we're also waiting on the actual news of the Rashid Rice suspension. That's why I would probably end up moving Xavier Worthy. Again, these are going to be guys that like have some of these guys are going to have these ridiculous range of outcomes where they could finish as even flirting as wide receiver 1, like your Christian Watson, and they could end up just not being fantasy relevant in like a Hollywood Brown. DeAndre Hopkins over the age apex. If you want him higher, we're expecting that Calvin Ridley is a little bit of a bust, and Will Levis also disappoints. Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson are going to be all the way down here at wide receiver 49. If we get a better expectation of what their roles are going to be in the offense, expecting that Ladd McConkey is going to be the Z. They move him around the formation. They get him a whole bunch of targets. Josh Palmer could, because he's attached to Justin Herbert, finish as somewhere in the wide receiver 2s. I could definitely see that happens. He's had his moments when he's been given the opportunity. And then Quentin Johnson, it's about the draft capital. We're not having the conversation about talent. We're just talking about the opportunity. Yeah, maybe he could be the wide receiver 2. I don't think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 in the offense. I can see him being wide receiver 2 attached to Justin Herbert. That might be enough for a lottery ticket. Finally, Keon Coleman, the number 2 draft pick by the Bills, a wide receiver 50. I think he's going to be just a pure X in this offense. There's probably a better chance that Khalil Shakur is going to be that Z, that movable chess piece like we saw with Stephon Diggs. The guy that scares me the most in this offense, or I shouldn't say scares me, the guy that I want the most pieces of in this offense is Dalton Kincaid. So when I look at a Keon Coleman and we're going to talk here in a second about Gabe Davis, the 1-to-1 replacement for the Gabe Davis years. Gabe Davis finishing 2022 with those 48 receptions, 836 yards and 7 touchdowns. That's probably closer to what I would be expecting from Keon Coleman, finishing this year attached to Josh Allen. And you see that with that year with Gabe Davis, where he finishes wide receiver 27, the top end of his range of outcomes. Michael Wilson, he's going to be my wide receiver 51. Moved him down 10 spots because Marvin Harrison and the other rookies, I think he still has the possibility to have a higher efficiency season, basically doubling what he did in 2023 and 13 games. I could definitely see that happening. Overall, I could see him not necessarily rolling over and just giving that high top 10 season to Marvin Harrison. He is a former 3rd-round draft pick. They did like him. It was bad quarterback play. I do like him a lot as a prospect. There was injuries when he was in college. So I do think there is upside to that. And it's the same basic story with Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk. If we could figure out which one of these guys is going to be potentially the number 2 in the offense, there just may be a wide receiver by committee going on with the Jaguars. None of them may be overwhelmingly fantasy relevant. They paid Gabe Davis $13 million. I bet they could get like low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 production from him. They paid Christian Kirk basically like pretty high end wide receiver 2 numbers. Like he did do that when in 2022 with them. So I could definitely see that that's within his range of outcomes. They brought in a rookie. I don't know. Adonai Mitchell was the 2nd-round draft pick for the Colts. This is a little interesting. Alec Pierce, I don't think is necessarily just going to roll over and give him the job. He's the 2nd-round pick from like 2 years ago. I imagine that Mitchell's going to eat into Pierce. I'm more concerned that Mitchell's going to lower the overall ceiling of Michael Pittman than actually thinking that he's going to be too fantasy relevant. Mitchell, I imagine, may be more relevant in the second half of the season. But we're going to have to see. And then all the way down here at wide receiver 54, I have Josh Downs. Again, if we're saying Michael Pittman's the number 1, the number 2 is going to be split in time between Alec Pierce and Mitchell. The odd man out is going to be Josh Downs. He's going to get what's left. So in 17 games last year, he had 68 receptions, 771 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It's hard to see how we can get more blood out of that stone when they brought in another 2nd-round draft pick. Jahan Dotson all the way down here at wide receiver 55. I do like Jaden Daniels coming in. I do like all the other guys that they brought in. Probably has for the team the ability to be the wide receiver 2. I could also see him being the number 4. They brought in McCaffrey and Sanote, the tight end, and Scary Terry's probably still going to be the number 1. All the way down here. Jalen Hyatt's going to have a little bit of value as potentially having that 2nd-year breakout. But again, Daniel Jones, and then they brought in Neighbors. So at best, he's going to be the number 2. And that's maybe if Darren Waller doesn't come back. Hard road. Curtis Samuel down here is wide receiver 3. So vacated targets from Stephon Diggs being traded. He could be the beneficiary. They didn't necessarily go out and wow me with the Keon Coleman pick. And especially because I think Keon Coleman's going to be more of a chess piece. Or excuse me, not chess piece, a position player that X, and everybody else is going to get the beneficiary of bringing in a guy like Coleman, than Coleman himself being the beneficiary. So there is a possibility that we could get somewhere around the range of a wide receiver 3 outcome from Curtis Samuel attached to Josh Allen. That's probably the bigger thing. Good quarterback play. I have Jaden Reed and Romeo Dobbs all the way down here at wide receiver. What is this? 58. And again, this is another one trying to figure out where these guys are going to shake out in the offense, expecting that Watson's going to be the number 1. This is probably the number 2 and the number 3. They also are going to have Musgrave and Kraft back. And then we're going to talk about Melton and Wicks. So I expect that one of these guys is going to move up. One of these guys is going to move down if we get a better idea of how these guys function. And then maybe Watson gets moved up. Maybe he gets moved down the line. It's going to be tough. Jameson Williams at wide receiver 59, good offense, draft capital. He runs a 4.3. Yeah. There's a range of outcomes where he can definitely flirt with wide receiver 2 there. Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, and then the 5th-round pick Bub Means. Like there's a theoretical wide receiver 2 that we'd be looking at. I don't know how much I love the Saints on that one. Jermaine Burton goes to the Bengals with the 3rd-round pick. I really like him coming out of Alabama. there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed. He probably has a lot more value in Dynasty for next year than he does this year. But I could definitely see that because reasons with the T. Higgins situation, he is the number 2 in this offense. Let's see. Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan. McMillan was a 3rd-round draft pick this year. Trey Palmer was a 3rd-round draft pick last year. Mike Evans over the AJPEX. Chris Godwin getting older. Maybe one of these guys can move into that wide receiver 2 role. I don't think either one of these guys is necessarily talented enough to move into becoming a wide receiver 1, especially from fantasy. Ricky Pearsall, the number 1 draft pick for the 49ers. This is just rough. I really like Ricky Pearsall as a talent, but I don't know how he stops being the number 5 overall in the offense. Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, and then Ricky Pearsall slots in there. At best, you're looking at wide receiver 3 unless something weird happens. And it's the same basic story with Luke McCaffrey. I like the pick. I like where he's going. It's a hard road for him to be anything other than maybe a wide receiver 2. I think there's probably slightly more of an upside to Luke McCaffrey attached to Jalen Daniels than Ricky Pearsall in that 49er offense this year. It's going to be rough for him. Trey Franklin, 4th-round draft pick, going to the Broncos all the way down here at wide receiver 65. I don't necessarily like his ability to finish anything other as the number 2 in that offense this year. Talk about Tez Walker, probably like wide receiver 3 range of outcomes, same as Rashad Bateman. Walker, 4th-round pick. Johnny Wilson, I don't like talking about the 6th-rounders or guys outside the 4th round unless there's a good reason behind it. I could see him slotting into that X position and really allowing A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith to have better seasons overall. I think that's more of his value. Again, think of a range of outcomes as like top-tier Gabe Davis. Probably very close because of the situation to the range of outcomes for Keon Coleman, and Keon Coleman has the opportunity to be the number 1 in the offense. That's why I would have him all the way there. When we look at Johnny Wilson, at best he's going to be a wide receiver 3 this year going on. If you're into that thing, like you're in those like 24-man vampire leagues, 32-year-old Tyler Lockett, your 34-year-old Adam Thielen, 31-year-old Brandon Cooks, probably the guy that I would like the most out of all these guys would be Brandon Cooks. Maybe he's the number 2 in that offense. I doubt it. I bet he's the number 3 behind Jake Ferguson. Malachi Corley, 3rd-round draft pick by the Jets. I don't think he's a real wide receiver. Possibility with Mike Williams still not looking like he's going to be good for camp. Could be the number 2 there. Has some stuff to like about him. If they're designing opportunities for him, but I don't think that necessarily I like the situation. That's why I have him all the way down here. Malik Washington, 6th-round pick, going to the Dolphins. They theoretically need a wide receiver 3. I bet Jonnu Smith may end up being the number 3 in the offense. That's if like A-Chain and the running backs aren't there. Long road. I don't even know if he's going to make the team. Like, I like the guy. I like him as a prospect. I thought he was going to go in the 3rd round. He went in the 6th. I don't even know he's going to make the team. I don't know why he dropped that far in the draft. Dontavian Wicks and Bo Melton, I talked about them. Like, theoretically, they could eat into that number 2 role and that slot role for the Packers. Interesting to see if someone gets moved or if there's an injury. Deep guy. Cooper Kupp is over the AJPEX. DeMarcus Robinson did eat into that at the end of the season. You see week 13 through week 17. So they re-signed him. I could definitely see him that trend continuing. That's why I would have him here. And then finally we have the Raiders theoretical number 2 between Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers, and then newly signed Michael Gallup. I don't think any of these guys are going to like really be able to give you anything in a low volume passing offense, but I talk about him. Mike Williams may move up somewhat. I don't know where I would put him, like maybe wide receivers 40s when and if we find out he's healthy. He's probably not draftable at this point. And the only other guy that I would talk about would be potentially, let me see if I can pull him up. It would be the 5th round pick, I think it was, for the Browns, Jamari Thrash. Theoretically, I mean, if there's a guy that gets cut, he could move into that wide receiver 3 role. But again, these are like deep, ugly draft picks. The main ones that I'd be focusing on after all of this would be Lad McConkey, looking at his ADP. If his ADP is under 40, that's a quick, easy smash. Even Marvin Harrison, when I was looking at this earlier, Marvin Harrison might be slightly undervalued, going at like wide receiver 10 on Fantasy Pros. ESPN, they had him at like wide receiver 14. I kind of like that. Overall, like there's Michael or Drake London being about like what I would expect him to be to return on investment. Javon Baker and Jalen Polk is potentially being the number one attached to rookie Drake May, going like somewhere between wide receiver 70 and 80. I really like that value. Let's see if we like Terry McLaurin. I think it's like probably undervalued by like 10 picks. These rookies are going to be like really difficult to evaluate. I like Leggett probably the best out of them when it comes to landing spots, and maybe Brian Thomas also. So like trying to look at wide receiver 52, that's good. That's going to be good return on investment. Probably my expectations on Brian Thomas would be wide receiver 3 on the year overall. Let's see. Flowers has some upside if he goes outside of wide receiver 30, because again, I would guess that he's going to be like I think that's a little too rich for him. Wide receiver 25. I think if you're getting Flowers, yeah, outside of wide receiver 30, I would probably be more interested in that. I think when he's already flirting with wide receiver 2, when they brought in another wide receiver, and they re-signed a guy, that's tough for me to say he's going to return on that. Khalil Shakur, I really like it. His value, if he's outside of wide receiver 36, I think he can return and maybe have upside on that. Calvin Ridley is going to be a little bit difficult to evaluate. I don't like George Pickens anymore because when I found out like they signed Arthur Smith, I think that's like stupid. I do kind of like Christian Watson. I think he can have like a Nico-esque type of season if he's going down here about like wide receiver 40. Once he gets outside of that, like wide receiver 40, I think is a very good value for him in your drafts. Deontay Johnson's down there. I'm trying to think. Christian Watson, wide receiver 44. Yeah, so I think he's got a lot of good value going on. Maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like I said, I probably moved. I want to move Tank Dell up. I want to move Rome up. I just don't know how I would do it. I want to move Worthy up. I think Worthy's going to have a lot of upside attached to Patrick Mahomes. We're going to talk about Patrick Mahomes probably tomorrow. I think that he moves up because of that pick. Like, there's a possibility that we could get like closer. Well, I would say the over underline for Patrick Mahomes right now is going to be like 4,500 yards, just because of that pickup of Worthy making a more of a vertical offense. The Chargers are going to have a lot. All the Chargers wide receivers that I talked about, like Rice and who's the other one? Johnson, they're going to have a little bit of value because like the wide receiver or all the receivers for the Chargers are so bad that like the wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 are going to be open. They don't even have tight end. There's a lot of vacated targets. They don't have a receiving back. So I like any pieces of the Chargers wide receivers I can get a hold of. Burton is only probably in dynasty. He's going to be probably going to be very valuable next year. Luke McCaffrey might have a little bit of sneaky value in deeper leagues. And I think that's about it for all the guys. Like the Packers are going to be like really difficult to evaluate overall. But yeah, that's going to be the re-rankings for the wide receivers going into 2024 offseason.